This is a story of PSA Airlines Flight 5342. On the 29th of January 2025, a CRJ 900 was on a flight from Wichita, Kansas to Ronald Reagan International Airport with 64 people on board. The flight was uneventful, and soon the crew was ready to take the plane in. At 8:30 p.m., the CRJ passed south of Dulles and 20 nautical miles west of DCA. The pilots put the plane into a turn to the south to prepare for a northbound approach into DCA. As the CRJ was maneuvering to get into position, a Sirsoky UH-60 or Blackhawk was getting ready to take off from the Division Army airfield. The chopper landed on a grass field in Culpepper, Virginia, and then flew north before heading east into Maryland. Then the chopper landed at Lytonsville, Maryland, and then made its way towards Washington, D.C. In the DCA control tower, the controller was handling both aircraft and chopper traffic. But the thing is, the choppers and the planes were using different frequencies, so the pilots couldn't hear the helicopters and the helicopter pilots could not hear the planes. This meant that it was possible for either the plane or the chopper pilots to not have the full picture of what was going on. At 8:32 p.m., the pilot of the chopper, Pat 25, contacted the DCA tower and requested to transition to the DCA airspace. The helicopters would use routes 1 and 4. The controller gave the crew an altimeter reading of 28.89, and the controller verified the readback. As all of this was happening, the instructor pilot who was flying the helicopter handed control over to the pilot in the left seat. So now the instructor was monitoring and communicating with ATC, and the pilot in the left seat flew the chopper. The controller cleared the chopper via the requested route, but in the cockpit, the crew were talking about how bad the audio quality of the controller's transmissions were. As the chopper reached Cabin John, they made a little bit of a wrong turn, but they corrected their mistake and then rejoined the path that they were cleared for. That's this little loop that you see here. At 8:39, the CRJ was cleared by the Potomac Consolidated Terminal Radar Approach Control, or Potomac Tracon, for the Mount Vernon visual approach to runway 1 at DCA. The captain was the one flying and the first officer was the one monitoring. This was a beautiful night with tons of visibility, and the landing should be easy, except for one thing: the winds. The winds had thrown a wrench into their works. The controller then asked if the crew of the CRJ could switch to runway 33 for landing. The captain asked his first officer if he had the numbers for the 33 approach, and the landing performance was good, but the captain wasn't sold on the idea. He said, "I really don't want to, but I guess, tell him. Nah, it's fine. We got the numbers for it. Yeah, tell him we'll do 33. The CRJ was now cleared for runway 33. The controller cleared the CRJ to circle the runway at the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and the crew acknowledged. 3,000 feet at the highway, 500 over the church, the captain said, referring to the predetermined altitudes that they had to hit on their way down to runway 33. The crew turned off the autopilot, and the captain took control of the plane and turned it away from the runway 1 localizer course. In the Blackhawk, the pilot was telling her instructor that it was, quote, getting choppy close to the ground, end quote. As the chopper flew over the Georgetown Reservoir, they were descending down to 200 feet. Once at 200 feet, the instructor pilot reported their position over the Memorial Bridge. As the chopper flew, the crew chief, who was the third member of the crew of the Blackhawk, was calling out obstructions that could be issues to their flight. He said, "Clear left crane, no factor." As they were navigating this urban environment, the pilots of the Blackhawk got a very important message from the controller. Pad 25, traffic just south of Wilson Bridge, is a CRJ at 1,200 feet circling runway 33. The instructor pilot had the CRJ in sight and said, Pad 25 has the traffic in sight, request visual separation. The chopper and the CRJ were 6.5 miles apart right now. The instructor pilot in the right-hand seat could see that there were multiple planes lined up for runway 33, and he remarks, "He's got them stacked up tonight." The pilot of the chopper, however, she was fighting the wind. Flight 5342, the CRJ, was now at 500 feet as the jet turned left for its final approach to the runway. The first officer calls out, "I've got 2 white, 2 red. The controller now gets a warning. Something was wrong. The conflict alert system was going off, and he said, Pat 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? The conflict alert was audible in the background of this transmission. In the cockpit of the CRJ, an alert goes off. traffic, traffic. This let the pilots know that there was another aircraft in their vicinity. The controller now transmits to the Blackhawk, Pat 25 passed behind that CRJ. The instructor replies, Pat 25 has the aircraft in sight, request visual separation. To this, the controller replied, vis separation. The instructor pilot, now trying to put some space between them and the CRJ that was hurtling towards them, says, alright, kinda come left for me, ma'am. I think that's what he's asking. We're kind of out towards the middle, which she obeys. In the cockpit of the CRJ, the Blackhawk appeared out of nowhere. Immediately, the pilots pulled back as hard as they could, and the elevators went from 1 degree of deflection to their max deflection of 24 degrees in just a second. Flight 5342 then slammed into the Blackhawk just seconds from touching down. Both the plane and the chopper fell into the Potomac. Unfortunately, none of the 64 people on the CRJ, nor the 3 people on the Blackhawk, made it. This was America's worst air crash in 24 years. With so much on the line, the investigation would be very thorough. So thorough that the final report is 419 pages in length. Now, we have a lot of material to get through, so let me rattle off a couple of things that did not cause the accident. Again, the following did not factor into the crash of Flight 5342. Flight 5342 crew qualifications, Flight 5342 crew medical factors, Flight 5342 crew fatigue, Pat 25 crew qualifications, Pat 25 crew medical factors, Pat 25 crew fatigue, airplane mechanical factors, helicopter flight controls, air traffic controller qualifications and tower staffing, controller medical factors, controller fatigue, and airport response. There is one thing that I would like to look into and provide clarity on, and that is the history of the pilot of the Blackhawk. Right after the crash, there was intense scrutiny on the pilot of the Blackhawk. At the time of the accident, she had 454 hours of experience, and 326 of that was on the Blackhawk. When the investigators talked to her instructor at the 12th Aviation Battalion, the instructor said that she was eager to learn, but struggled with, quote, stick and rudder skills. This, however, was symptomatic of a lot of pilots, as a lot of them learned to fly on the more automated UH-60M. Then coming down to the less automated UH-60L was harder. Another instructor who carried out her night vision evaluation found her performance well below average in 2022. He then, quote, reverted her to the lowest readiness level, RL3, and trained her extensively until he determined that she demonstrated full readiness, RL1, in March 2022, end quote. Then, in 2023, the first instructor that we talked about flew with the pilot again in January 2023 and found her performance to be, quote, standard. A third standardization instructor pilot who conducted an instrument evaluation with the pilot in January of 2024 described her as incredibly professional, diligent, and thorough. He recalled that her performance was always very good and that she had a very good reputation as an aviator and an officer. With that out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this accident. The first thing that went wrong that night was the fact that the helicopter controller and the local controller was one person. Usually this is 2 separate roles, but on that fateful night, it was one person. Now, this wasn't because they were understaffed. That's just how they set out to do things that night. But this one person was in charge of anywhere between 7 and 12 aircraft. In his own words, he was, quote, a little overwhelmed. In the 2 minutes before the crash, the controller made 29 transmissions. And in the 90 seconds before the crash, the controller was juggling 12 aircraft. The report goes into detail about what he was doing right before the crash, and boy, is it intense. He was in contact with the CRJ, clearing them to land, talking to the Blackhawk, trying to keep them away from the CRJ, then talking to a departing airplane. Then there was another medical helicopter in the air that required his attention. That's literally not even half of what he had to deal with. Then, as the chopper and the plane got closer, he was in what's known as expectation-driven processing. He told them to maintain separation, and they would, he thought. So if one of the planes did not behave as expected, then it would be hard for the controller to notice deviations. This is partially the reason as to why he did not give Flight 5342 a warning about the chopper. He told them to stay away, so he assumed that they would. The other reason is that he had other priorities that took his attention away. Moreover, when he did warn the chopper about the CRJ, he did not tell them what to do. He had the warning on the screen, and as per rules, he should have told them and the CRJ how to resolve the conflict. That did not happen. Then, when they got to the CVR from the chopper, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The ATC communications had a ton of static in them, to the point where a lot of the transmissions were broken. In one of the transmissions that the controller made to the chopper about the position of the CRJ, the word circling was consumed by the static. Instead of circling for runway 33, the transmission just said for runway 33. The pilots that fly these choppers in this area aren't very familiar with the approach to runway 33, especially the circling one. The pilot of the Blackhawk had to now infer the position of the plane from the bits and pieces of information that she had. To illustrate how unfamiliar helicopter pilots were to this sort of approach, in the 1 year before the accident, only 5 to 7% of northbound arrivals landed on runway 33, and a lot of chopper pilots had never even encountered a plane when traveling on Route 4. Maybe she thought, okay, if they're on the final for runway 33, I have nothing to worry about. This has never been a problem for me. Maybe they'll pass in front of me before I get there. Making matters worse for the pilots of PAT 25, they were fighting some strong winds low to the ground. When they recreated the flight with another Army pilot with 600 hours of experience, he said that he had insufficient capacity for easy attention to additional tasks. So, at this point, just to recap, the controller has way too much on his plate, the pilot of the chopper doesn't know where the CRJ is due to the bad radio transmissions, and even if she did, she's not in a great position to pay attention to the plane as she's fighting some bad winds. Making matters worse, even if she were able to give her undivided attention to the planes, there were 4 planes lined up with the runway. At the time of the warning, these planes would have just been specks of light in the distance. You wouldn't have been able to discern the CRJ even if she knew where to look. So when the controller said, CRJ just south of the Wilson Bridge, that meant nothing to the pilots in the chopper. The instructor pilot was also not in a good spot to identify the plane. He was busy coaching the pilot, and he was looking out for the crane that the crew chief had called out. He knew that the CRJ was at the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, so he knew that it didn't pose an immediate danger to them. Then, when the plane got closer for the instructor pilot who was in the left-hand seat to see the plane, he would have had to turn his head all the way to the left and then actively scan the sky to find the plane. The controller was asking something along the lines of, do you have the CRJ in sight? No direction was given, like CRJ at 10 o'clock. Piling onto everything that was going wrong was the fact that the chopper did not have an integrated traffic awareness and alerting system that could have provided an oral alert to the crew. The lack of this integrated system also meant that the crew did not have a display showing them where the other planes were. To see where the other planes were, I kid you not, they had to rely on the 4Flight app on an iPad. Quote, although the crew had the capability to display ADS-B information on a moving map display on portable tablets using the 4Flight application, TAAB pilots told investigators that they did not typically monitor their tablets during low-level operations on the DC helicopter routes because the flying task was too demanding. End quote. I am genuinely curious right now. Why doesn't the Blackhawk have a functioning traffic display? You'd think that something like this would be standard on a $25 million helicopter. This video is already long, but unfortunately, it keeps getting worse. The barometric altitude tells you your altitude based on the air pressure outside, and if you calibrate it well, it is very accurate. In this case, it was calibrated well, but the chopper and the altimeter was old, and over the course of the life of the altimeter, small errors started to accumulate. The altimeter was off by 100 feet. While this is okay when you're at altitude, when you're doing low-level ops like the one Flight 25 was doing, that's a large error. This meant that they were above the altitude limit that was prescribed for Route 4. This altitude error was seen on other Battalion 12 UH-60L choppers as well. The thing is, routes 1 to 4 near DC-8 did not account for these errors, nor for human error. The margins were razor thin in and around the airport. What's crazy is that for Route 4, of the 523 flights analyzed, 260 or 49% of them went over that 200 feet limit. Here's the kicker. Even if you flew Route 4 perfectly, the maximum separation that you would have with the landing plane is 75 feet. The design of the helicopter routes needed some serious work. This is why on the 11th of March 2025, the NTSB said that another helicopter route needed to be found as soon as possible due to public risk. Okay, so this is what was happening with regards to the chopper. What was the crew of the CRJ doing as all of this happened? Well, as it turned out, they were having a lot of the same problems. The lights in and around the airport made it very hard to spot the chopper. Moreover, the pilots were busy with the landing, and the odds that they saw the chopper fell dramatically because of that. Simulator tests showed that with the lights and the workload, the probability of seeing the chopper would have been vanishingly low. When they looked at the data for the CRJ, they saw that the traffic alert popped up at the worst possible time for the pilots. The captain had the plane in a manual left turn to line up with runway 33. He had to maintain the speed, heading, and altitude of the plane at just 550 feet off of the deck. The captain did not have the time to scan the sky for threats. The first officer was monitoring the instruments to make sure that the approach was stable. Based on the timing of what they were doing, the first officer would have been adjusting the speed bug, meaning that he probably was looking down as well. But the thing that doomed them was their training. Pilots at PSA Airlines are trained not to maneuver until they get an RA or a resolution advisory. At this point, they only had the traffic warning, whereas the resolution advisory, as the name suggests, would have given them a way to avoid the conflict. The automation would say something like climb, or descend. But unfortunately for the pilots of the CRJ, this warning was inhibited below a certain altitude threshold. On the other side of the radio, the controller had a conflict alert, but it probably didn't get him to act because conflict alerts were so common at DCA. Quote, in the 30 minutes before the accident occurred, the conflict alert could be heard in the background during 18 controller transmissions. 169 controllers reported that they often received conflict alerts for non-conflicts, such as when aircrafts were on diverging paths, or that the conflict alert would continue to activate even after the controller had taken the action to mitigate the conflict. With that, the last line of defense had fallen. A collision between Flight 5342 and Pat 25 was inevitable. As I write this script, I'm at 7 pages of text. Usually at this point in the video, I'd go, well, if this one thing had been done differently, then this accident would not have happened. But in this case, so many things had to go wrong for this accident to happen. It almost feels like it was an accident waiting to happen. If not these two planes, then some other day. Sure, if the pilots of the chopper didn't make that wrong turn, the plane would have just passed in front of them. Or if the controller's transmissions would have come in correctly, then they might have been able to spot the plane and avoid it. If the altimeter was working, then the jet would have passed harmlessly over the chopper with just 75 feet to spare. It would have been close, but they would have made it. But none of that takes away from the fundamental truth that this was an accident waiting to happen. The structural faults at place would have still been there. The report goes into a detailed list of recommendations to the FAA, the U.S. Army, the Department of War, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General, the RTCA Program Management Committee, and a couple of others. To prevent something like this from happening, change needs to come from all of these institutions. But it's not going to be soon enough for the 67 people that lost their lives in this accident. What do you think of all of this? Do you think the pilots could have avoided a collision? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The thing is, this wasn't an isolated incident. Near misses have been happening across America for a long time, and you can learn more about them in the video on your screen right now. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.